Hello and welcome back to another Blu-ray review. This will be the fourth and final review of a film in this set from Eureka, which is creeping horror, four kind of forgotten, quasi-forgotten gems from the Universal horror canon. And this final film is from 1946 and is entitled House of Horrors. And there isn't really a kind of... It doesn't really fit the title, as we're finding with some of these movies, but nevertheless, Meet the Creeper. Universal presents House of Horrors. It just makes you think of like a carnival setting, or like, I don't know, an episode of Goosebumps, perhaps. It doesn't quite fit that in a sense, but I really like this one. In fact, I think this might be, as I try and get an angle that doesn't have ridiculous amounts of glare on the case, this might be the best one of the bunch. I think the best one of the set. So this was directed by Gene Yarbrough, released in 1946, as I said, and this was when, and it's an interesting story that is covered throughout the supplements on this Blu-ray set, the history of Universal's horror cycle / canon. The explosion of the monster movies in the early 30s with Dracula, Frankenstein, so on and so on and so on. And then it kind of petered off a bit. And then there were some re-releases of Dracula and Frankenstein in the late 1930s that did big numbers. And Universal realized, okay, there is still a market for these horror movies. And after the Code era came in, let's start putting some more of those out there in kind of cheaper double bill kind of B-movie situations like Night Monster or Horror Island that were made as kind of a part of a double bill showing. But then they were looking, as the 40s were continuing, for new types of kind of monster characters. I think that they kind of struck gold again with the Wolfman in 1941, did a bunch of sequels to that, and then it was lagging a bit. So they were looking for new kind of monsters that could be kind of icons that they could continue on with. And one of them was this character of the Creeper, played by Rondo Hatton, who'd been in a previous movie to this as this kind of brutish murderer. And they wanted to do more with him, and he has a very distinctive look. And I actually looked him up and did some of my own research, very little, but I like to kind of just look around and see if I can find anything else to talk about that might be interesting or pertinent to the review. I saw a picture of him before he was affected by this condition called acromegaly, where it's an imbalance in the human growth hormone that causes the body to grow too large in specific places. It actually ended up costing him his life before this film even came out. So it was in, I believe, maybe late 1945 that he filmed this movie along with another one where he also played the Creeper character. And both were released posthumously because he passed away of a number of heart attacks at the age of, I think, 51, 52. So he was fairly young, and this condition did ultimately take his life. But it kind of gave him this incredible silhouette and look for a horror movie. And so that was very much utilized, one could say exploited. And in this film, to great effect. I mean, he is just so memorable, just looking at him. It's kind of a face that a Lon Chaney would have created back in, the 20s. And here it is kind of live in flesh and in gorgeous, moody black and white. And this film is about an artist named Marcel, who's played by the actor Martin Kosleck, a German actor, and he is a sculptor, and he creates these very abstract pieces, and he's kind of a starving artist. The movie opens with him and his cat, and he talks about how his cat can go out and find food for itself, but he has to kind of wait for someone to buy one of his sculptures. So it very much sets him up as a sympathetic character to begin with. And a potential buyer for one of his pieces comes over to his place, and he's accompanied by this snooty art critic played by the great Alan Napier, who, I've said it before, I'll say it again, I love Alan Napier. He just elevates any little role that I see him in, and it's usually these kind of smaller parts that I see him in movies from the 40s and 50s, before he kind of gains kind of the iconic status of being Alfred in the Batman 1960s series. There's two Batman connections in this particular movie, actually, and that's the first one. So Alan Napier is this very, degrading, derogatory art critic who looks down upon Marcel's work and convinces this potential buyer that it's all rubbish and, costs this guy money. And so Marcel has an understandable hatred for this art critic. And he decides that he's done. He's going to go down to the docks and down to the waterfront, and he's going to kill himself. And then he sees someone struggling in the water, and it's this creeper character who's been on the run and is presumed dead, perhaps, but still wanted by the police. And Marcel saves him. And this creeper character eventually says, "Why did you save me?" And I like the way that he talks. He feels like this kind of there's limited vocabulary, kind of a savage feel to him, and that makes him feel more dangerous because it's almost like this is almost a childlike brain inside this Hulk-like body, and he's a very convincing monster character, I think, and Marcel kind of slowly but very quickly at the same time exploits that and ends up sending the creeper off to do his bidding, which is ultimately killing off the people who are his enemies. And there's another art critic character played by Virginia Gray called Joan Medford. And she's just radiant in the film. I thought she brought, again, I keep coming back to it, these female characters are really making the movies for me. They should have had more of these women in these movies instead of the male-dominated cast. And that's not me trying to kind of, tie into any, current trends or, whatever you want to call it. But I find them really captivating. There's some great actresses working in these old movies, and she has a real life to her. Radiant, again, is the word that I would use. And she is, she's an art critic too. She has a nice scene with Alan Napier where they're kind of trading barbs and stuff. But she ultimately becomes kind of the hero of the movie a little bit because she's the one who kind of figures out the killings, whereas there's a detective character who's played by Bill Goodwin, and he's a nice character. He's not like an incompetent cop, but he certainly is distracted by other things in the movie and ends up not being the one who kind of cracks the code, so to speak. But I liked her interactions with Marcel and how she was showing up at his place to kind of do a story on him and stuff. And that was an interesting point. And I'll talk about that in the final video coming up next. But the placement of critics in this film is very interesting, and maybe the underlying theme of that is something I didn't really pick up on when I first watched the film. But I was really invested in all the characters, and another little cameo from Janet Shaw, who I talked about back in the film Night Monster. Very memorable but small part in that as the housemaid, and she's a blink and you'll miss it moment here as a cab driver, but it was nice to see her pop up for a very brief moment. And it's nice that I watch these films and now I'm kind of, that it's just adding more actors to my brain, of like, oh, him, oh, her, and I like it. It's fun. It's fun and also exciting because when you really like an actor or an actress and you see them pop up in another movie, it gives you that extra kick. There's a nice energy that it fills you with. Oh, this will be cool. Obviously, with her, she's in the film for like 2 seconds, but generally speaking, just broadening my horizons with films and performers alike. And so that's one thing with this set that I've also enjoyed, is kind of getting to know. I'd like to see more of Janet Shaw, even though I know that her career was very limited, as I've already talked about, and uncredited roles, is pretty much colors her entire filmography. There's an actor called Robert Lowry who plays the character Stephen Morrow in this, and he's also an artist, but he's a painter, and he does kind of commercial art, and he's doing a portrait of this kind of pinup girl throughout the movie, and he's also kind of the hero in a sense, if you want to, look at it like that. But he's a likable guy, likable character. There's not too much to him, but he is also connected to the world of Batman, because a few years after this, in 1949, he would go on to play Batman in live action in the film serial Batman and Robin, which I watched 10 odd years ago and couldn't tell you a thing about now. There were slogs, those old Batman serials from the 1940s, but he is a Batman, and so that's kind of cool. But I think that for me, the character of Marcel and the Creeper, well, let's just talk about Marcel. I think that the actor who plays him, Martin Kosleck, did an amazing job. You really feel the starving artist angle of him. You feel the kind of tortured soul aspect of the character, this guy who has been pushed to his limit, and has nothing really but his arts, and it's given him nothing, in return. And here's this guy who he's able to kind of vicariously carry out his revenge on these people who've wronged him through this creeper character. And they do kind of show you that this creeper is not like a character who's being exploited as such because in the movie, because he wanders off one night on his own and kills a woman. So he naturally leans towards murdering women to begin with. So it's not like this is some kind of, because I mentioned there's a childlike quality to him, but there is. He very much feels like this oafish kind of, primalistic kind of force, which, is a pretty scary thought with someone with that, perceived strength as he is portrayed on screen. And it's worth noting that when Marcel first saves the creeper, he at first views him as this muse of sorts. He wants to make a sculpture out of his face to find the beauty in this kind of grotesque, ugly, misshapen face, not to be too unkind. And you get the sense that through doing something so positive, like turning the negative of being suicidal into a positive of saving someone's life, and then finding artistic inspiration in that and creating this masterpiece that will then be able to, give him money that he can live off of, and it kind of will break the cycle. Like, there's so much that could go right from this scenario. And yet through the creeper's natural leanings towards homicide, and through the hatred within Marcel's own heart, he kind of gives in to, not just turning all of that into a positive, but kind of leaning on the negative and being drawn to the dark side, and using the creeper not as this inspirational muse, but as an instrument of destruction. But then it all comes to a head with Joan Medford and the creeper and Marcel, and I just think that those three characters and those three actors, Marcel Koslick, Rondo Hatton as the creeper, and then Virginia Gray, all did phenomenal jobs. And then I'd say Alan Napier, I loved as the kind of asshole art critic, So I really enjoyed the film. I thought it was really, really good, and I don't know if this is one of the ones that was shot in 2 weeks again. It probably was, I suppose, but there's it feels a bit noirish at times as well, a lot like shadows and stuff. And I loved the character of the creeper and thought it was a really memorable kind of screen villain. And Marcel was a real complicated, I wouldn't call him an anti-hero at all, I suppose, but he isn't just an out and out bad guy. You can see, not that I would justify it, of course, in the real world, but, just through, he's sympathetically painted at the beginning, and you almost get a sense that he's testing the waters with the creeper, because he never says to him, go and kill this person. He says, I hate that man, and he lives at, 1213 Riverside Drive, and the creeper's just like, okay. There's kind of a humor to it where, the creeper just kind of, just like, okay, I'll go do this. Puts on his jacket and his hat, But I really, really enjoyed this. It was a nice way to end off the set, and I do think bell to bell, it's probably the best film of the four, because it has the stronger overall feeling of the narrative. I think it doesn't feel like it rushes to a conclusion, and I think that every actor is pretty strong, but particularly those main three. And main three characters being Marcel, the creeper, and Joan Medford. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed the film. This is another one I would go back and watch again and maybe show to Connie. So that's pretty much it. I will now hold off on talking about the Blu-ray and the extras until a fifth and final video. I just feel like it's nicer just to have single videos, just me talking about the film itself, and then we'll do a wrap-up video talking about all the extras and stuff. And that's pretty much it. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.